For problem number 2, we're looking at signals passing through a noisy channel. The signals may or may not be influenced by the environment. The first question is to find out the probability of receiving a 0 in the output. And in order to do that, we're going to figure out the whole process of receiving a signal. There are actually 2 steps prior to the receiving process. First is the generation, and the second is the transmission. And we have to assume that the generation and transmission of the signals are actually 2 independent processes, which are not indicated in the problem itself. However, we could assume that from our common sense. Therefore, since they are independent, we could say that the probability of receiving a signal equals the probability happened in the transition and the probability in the generation process. That is to say, to receive a 0, we have 2 ways. First, we generate a 0, and the environment does not influence the signal. Or we generate a 1, and the environment does influence the signal. So there's actually 2 ways. And if we substitute all those terms with the actual numbers given in the problem, we could eventually get our final answer, that is 0.62. As for the second question, we're going to be looking at the probability of making an error. There are 2 ways of making an error. First, you generate a 0, but you finally get a 1, or you generate a 1, but you finally get a 0. Common sense tells us that these 2 ways are mutually exclusive. So we could say that the probability of making an error equals the probability of method number 1 plus the probability of method number 2. And also we know that these the generation and the transmission are independent. We're going to give out those deductions. That is, we generate a 0, but it finally gets a 1, and we generate a 1 and finally gets a 0. And finally, we could find out the final result is 0.14.